Welcome now, Mr. Ken Beatty.
I teach professors. I teach graduate students and doctoral students. I'm a professor at a university. But I also write a lot of textbooks, and I'm very interested in teaching English as a second language to secondary students, as well as other students of other ages. So I did that. I did that for 6 years. I was a secondary school teacher before I started teaching university. So it continues to be a deep interest of mine, and it's something that I'd like to talk about today. Okay, so the theme of today's talk is working with the teenage brain. And as Patricia just told us, at the end of it, there will be some time for questions. If we don't get to your question, don't worry. I will reply to you personally. So please don't hesitate. If you have any questions whatsoever, I would love to hear from you because it really helps me to understand some of the problems and issues that are out there for teachers today. We're very fortunate today to have so many teachers from all around the world. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. For me, it's 5 o'clock in the morning, but we have guests from Italy, from Argentina, from Greece, from the Ukraine, from Russia, Estonia, Nicaragua, and even Morocco. So fantastic. So many different continents. Anyway, so throughout this, think about what everything applies to your own particular teaching situation. That's really what it's all about. I'm going to be using some examples today from a textbook called Wider World. Now, whether you're using this textbook or not doesn't matter. Many of the points will still apply to whatever materials you are using. But an important thing to ask yourself is, do my materials do what they need to do in the classroom? And there you have a choice. You can supplement them, you can add to things, you can do a little bit more on your own, or maybe you can consider switching to other textbooks at some point. Wider World is part of the Pearson series, and it includes what we call the 21st century skills. Now, students are different. Students are different today than they were when I was a child or when I was going to high school so many years ago. In fact, one of the biggest differences has to do with the 21st century tools. Those tools are, as you know, iPhones, any kind of smartphones that they have, computers that 30 years ago students simply weren't using on a regular basis. With that comes skills that they need. The skills include things like a digital literacy, being able to search for things online. And when you do search for things online, knowing the difference between things that are true and things that are not true. So you have to be able to critically think and assess things. Students today also need 21st century content. They need to look at content that has to do with them, has to do with their lives and their concerns and what their jobs are going to be. If you look at a textbook from 50 years ago, probably lots of examples of farming, and of course we still have farmers today, but not so many. In fact, where most people today live in cities around the world. And finally, that context. So our context is, what is our background? And one of the interesting things about our context today is that it is so, like today's session, it is so international. We're really talking to students and training them to be world citizens, because it's likely that even if they do not travel to other countries, they will be in communication with people from other countries on a regular basis. And it's likely, even in their gaming and things like that, that they already are. So those are some of the focuses that we're going to go through. And as we go through, I really want to talk about 7 key issues. And I'm going to raise a number of ideas, and I'll keep coming back to these in different ways. Those are culture, first language of the students, and does that first language interfere or does it help with learning English? The maturity of the students, aptitude, intelligence, learning styles, and finally autonomy. So these are kind of themes for today's talk, and I'm going to keep going back and forth between them. We have some questions about them, So first of all, it has to do with culture. So for culture, the big question really is simply, what do we teach about culture? Now, generally in language classrooms, we teach a lot of culture of the target culture, English culture, English language culture, or the culture of the places where English is commonly spoken. But an important thing is, regardless of wherever you are in the world, students need to be able to talk about what they know, what they see, what they do in their own lives, what their favorite foods are, and things like that. So one thing we can't overlook with culture is we need to teach them the English language for local culture. That's an important idea. The second one has to do with first language. And that's, again, as I mentioned, what makes it more or less difficult to learn English? Well, if you're starting off and your writing script is the English alphabet, like our friends today in Italy, of course, that's going to be a little bit easier for them. Maybe a little bit more challenging if your first language is Arabic, such as the teachers coming today from Morocco, or even the Cyrillic alphabet used in the Ukraine and Russia. So this is going to be a little bit different, and I know we probably have some teachers visiting today from China. So how do we predict, identify, and remediate typical learner errors? Because that's one thing that we find, is that the first language will influence the second language with some predictable types of mistakes, and we need to be able to identify and isolate those. A third one is maturity. How do we deal with learners who are at different maturity levels? So in a classroom, we often find students who are misbehaving, and it doesn't matter how old the students are. There's often some who act out. Partly, it's important for us to realize the reasons why they act out. Often this has to do with the idea that they are uncomfortable with the materials or with the context of the teaching classroom, so they want to show off in some way. Essentially, we have to just remember that age does not equal maturity. We can have older students who are not as mature as some younger students. So again, I'm just trying to raise some questions and some concerns and ideas here. Another one is aptitude. So aptitude has to do with your ability to learn a language. We just had a guest staying with us for the last week. She's Swiss. She's from Switzerland, and oh my goodness. So of course she speaks English with us, but her first language was German, but she learned French in school and Italian in school. And where is she living now? She's living in China. So she's working in Shanghai, so she's been learning Chinese. But before that, she lived in Kenya. So many different languages. And this, of course, is an example of aptitude for learning a language. The first thing for aptitude is, if you've learned another language before, it helps. But of course, we don't always have that luxury for our students. So we need other things. We need attitude, a positive attitude toward language learning. We need the students to have a set of skills that helps them to learn efficiently and effectively. And that can sometimes overcome just a natural aptitude for learning a language. Learning styles. This is a huge area, very controversial. Howard Gardner, many of you will know, basically the different types of intelligence. But there's some questions about whether or not people just prefer to learn in some ways, or if they really do learn better in some ways. So you can try a little experiment. And again, this video will be available for you afterwards if you just want to look at this again. But you can ask students or teachers to say whether or not they're mostly visual learners or auditory learners. And then you can ask students to read 10 5-syllable words for 1 minute. Take the words away and ask them to write those words. And it can be 3-syllable words, or depending on the level of your students. And then to make them simpler. And then you remove the words, ask them to write them, and then you repeat the exercise, getting students to listen to 10 words and then write them. So what should happen? Well, if they say they're visual learners, then they should be able to remember more of the words that they just read. If they say they're auditory learners, then they should be able to remember more of those words that they heard. But I can tell you already, I've done this experiment with a couple thousand different teachers in different countries, and in fact, it's all mixed up. People think they're visual, they're really auditory. People think they're auditory, they're really visual. So in this case, sometimes we need to think, is it that you have a learning style or just a learning preference? You may prefer it, but it might not be the best way for you to learn. When I taught in Hong Kong, I taught in Hong Kong for 12 years. And my students say, oh, Dr. Beatty, you can talk. We will listen. We enjoy hearing you talk. Of course, I said, nonsense. You need to practice your speaking, so I want you to talk more. So we can't confuse learning styles with learning preferences. Intelligence. Intelligence is a very, very difficult one. We say that all children learn one language. They all learn their first language. So why can't they learn another? In fact, everyone is intelligent enough to learn another language. It might take a little longer for some students. And there's a famous quote from Henry Widdowson, and he was talking to a mother who had talking about a mother who was called in to see the student's French teacher. The French teacher said, "Oh, Mrs. Smith, your child is too stupid to learn French." And so the mother was very smart, and she said, "Well, why don't you just teach him whatever language that stupid French children learn?" So the idea, again, is that everybody can learn a language, and intelligence really doesn't have to be part of it. Autonomy. This is a very, very big question, and the illustration here comes about the different ages of people, from babies to children to adults and to old age. The important thing for us is we have a very intensive short time with our students to teach them, but after that, they disappear, right? They leave our classrooms. They don't call you up, 20 years later and say, oh, can you tell me how to conjugate the verb to be? Nobody does that. They don't contact you afterwards. And so in this way, they don't get the opportunity. They don't get the opportunity to continue learning unless we teach them skills where they can become autonomous learners, people who can learn on their own. So that's an important set of skills we need to share with students. Did you used to be a teenager? I think the answer for all of you is yes. Here's myself as a teenager, and this is what I look like now. A little bit of a difference, right? Still handsome, I hope. At least my wife thinks so. All right, so we're talking today about teenagers and the particular concerns that we have about how they learn and how they don't learn, and what are some of the psychological issues to do with the brain that gets in the way of students learning a language. That's really what I'd like to explore today. So I'm curious to know, what does brain research tell us about teenagers? So first of all, I can tell you, because I've done a lot of research in this area, and I've read a lot of the published research that's been done in this area, the first thing we know is teenagers are different. And they're different in many different ways. And for us to be effective and efficient teachers, we need to understand how teenagers are a little bit different. And for those of you who already have teenagers of your own at home, okay, I don't need to explain this. You probably have a very, very good understanding of how your children have changed from babies to young children into teenager years, where they're a little bit rebellious and they're finding out what their personalities are, and they act out in interesting and curious ways. So I want to talk about 10 teenage brain facts. That's really what I want to focus on. Okay, so first question, you can think about this yourself, and if you're sitting with another person, one or two or more people, you can actually quickly discuss some of these questions yourself. But otherwise, try to think, as I go through, try to think, yes, what do I think is the answer to this? So I'm trying to make this a little interactive. So how do you define teenager? Most of you will say, that's ridiculous. We know what a teenager is. That's from ages 13 to 19. Right? And that's what we would think, and that's not, though, what psychology tells us. So our first brain fact is that the teenage brain continues to develop between the ages of 11 and 25. This is where we start to see true biological, chemical, physical changes in the brain from ages 11 and all the way up to 25. But the other interesting part of this fact is it is not the same for boys and girls. In fact, it's quite different. Girls start their development, and these are general numbers. Of course, it may differ individually, but generally, girls' brains start to become quite different at age 11. It continues in girls until about age 20. By age 20, a girl has an adult brain. That means they are no longer behaving and thinking like teenagers. They tend to think like adults. But boys, I'm embarrassed to say, boys start later, around age 20, age 12, and they continue until age 25. So they continue to be teenager and have teenage types of behaviors until they're at the age of 25. So it's kind of curious. It's kind of curious how these changes happen over these years. And I think understanding that helps us to understand some of the other points I'm going to talk about as we go through the teenage brain. Because when you suddenly realize, oh yeah, 24-year-olds, 16-year-olds, not so much different between boys in some ways, then things start to make more sense. 40% of teenagers in the world don't attend school, though. And the big thing about school is they miss out. They miss out from a lot of things. So in many countries, students are just too poor to attend a school, or they don't have laws encouraging students to continue attending school, even up to just a basic grade 12 of some kind. And so a lot of teenagers don't attend. And in this way, they end up missing opportunities. So adolescent learning, of course, everybody learns something, and everybody learns from someone or somewhere, but they learn in different ways. So influences in adolescent learning is not just from school, although school is one of the most important ones, but they also learn from their peers, from other students. They also learn from their home. How do their siblings act? How do their parents act? They learn from what we call distributed resources, which have to do with online materials. So important today, so important. They often learn from their work. If they begin work early, then they become inculcated or introduced into certain expectations of what it is to be a young adult, and also how to learn new ideas. And finally, there's things like communities that they belong to. Could be anything. Could be a church or a mosque, or could be a soccer club or a chess club. Anything, another community that you belong to in some formal or informal way. These are all ways in which we introduce them. But part of the important thing, we introduce students to learning, but part of the important thing is how do we socialize students? Because this is one of the biggest challenges. They can learn everything, say, on the World Wide Web, and people often say to me, oh, Ken, in a few years, probably, people will just be learning online, or will learn from a robot or something like that. But in fact, what we need is students to be socialized. We need students to learn how to talk to and act with other students. It's an important sort of an idea. How do we do that? How do we do that? And specifically, how do we do that in the classroom with the teaching materials that we have? Well, one of the biggest things that we can do in a classroom is to constantly have pair work and group work activities. I go to some schools and I'm always amazed. I'm invited into classrooms and I'm always amazed at how much the teacher's talking and how little the students are talking. Students need to talk a lot to each other to practice what they learned, and more importantly, to build the confidence to be able to speak outside of the classroom. This is extremely important. So this is a typical sort of type of activity, a pair work activity. And pairs use these questions to talk about your family. And we'll keep coming back to this idea. We don't want them to talk just about a family in a book, but your family. Because, of course, you know, if I go to another country, nobody will say to me, oh, can you tell me about the family on page, 236? No, they're going to ask about my family. So students need to be able to do this, and everybody's answer will be slightly different. So it talks about some basic questions. But creating pair work opportunities is one of the most important things we do in the classroom. Okay, let's go on to our next brain fact, number 2. Teenagers' brains are ready to learn, but they see themselves as teenagers and the world as unchanging. What do we mean here? Well, again, you can think back to your own teenage years, but you can also, if you know teenagers, you can think about how they tend to think that some things will last forever. So they have their friends, and George is my best friend. Oh, he'll be my best friend forever. We know our friends change throughout life. They get new types of clothing, right? And they say, oh, I love this shirt. I'm going to love this shirt forever. This is the best style. Everything else is bad, right? Even though they were wearing another style of shirt or pants last year or shoes. So they tend to see the world as not really changing. They think that it's just something psychological in the brain. They see themselves also as unchanging. I believe this. I'll always feel this way. And of course, they won't, and they'll grow, but they have a hard time understanding this. So what's our teacher's response? Our response as teachers is try to show them opportunities about how different the world is and how other people change throughout their lives. So they start to get those hints or those clues that, yes, your world is going to be different, and it's going to be very, very different in the coming years. So they need to look at things and be exposed to a lot of different teenagers and families and people of different ages in different contexts doing different things. Because, for example, they might skateboard and they say, oh, I love skateboarding. I will always skateboard, right? And you say, well, how many 50-year-old skateboarders do you see? Not so many. Your interests will change. So we need to give them the opportunities. We need to show them perspectives on a changing world by introducing them to other students in textbooks or in the classroom even, who have different interests and think about things in different ways. A great question to ask your teenage students is, say, go home and interview your parents and ask them what they were like as teenagers, or what they thought as teenagers. And it can be very, very amusing to think what their parents were like. Okay, Jack Richards suggests that teaching typically involves several different things, selecting learning activities. But one of the things he mentions in this long list here, and again, this is available on the video for you later to look at, is preparing students for new learning. And this is something we often don't do very well. We simply ask the students, say, open your books, we're looking at this. And we don't really prepare them for the learning. How can we prepare students for learning? We have to start off by thinking about what they know, what they don't know, and maybe what they think they know, but they're wrong about. So students come into a classroom and they're not empty vessels. We don't open up their heads and pour in knowledge. What we're really doing is we're trying to work with what they already know, and if we make them aware of what they don't know, they're more susceptible to learning. So that's something we have to do in a very big way. That's often in the textbooks. What we have to do is we have to ask them a lot of questions so that they can contribute what they can see, what they can know. Now, and you see, this is a typical type of an activity that helps us to do something like that. What can you see in the photos? In pairs, match the photos 1 to 6 with phrases A to F. Okay, so you can do this. Is the concert very long? So they're looking and they're using their own knowledge. You say, is this a language activity? Well, we know that it is, but they don't. They think it's kind of a puzzle-solving activity. So that's great. That's great because they don't understand that they're learning, actually. So it's kind of a subversive learning of some kind. So exposing them to lots of different things, lots of different culture, different how people are similar or different around the world, it's an important part of what we do. One biggest thing is something I already mentioned is to make it personal. So you always have to turn it back to the students so they're getting language to talk about themselves. Because again, if they travel to New York, if they're not from New York, nobody's going to say to them, "Oh, you're from Morocco or you're from Argentina. Oh, can you tell me about the Statue of Liberty?" No, no one will ask about that. They'll say, "What can you tell me about Morocco? What can you tell me about Argentina?" So we have to give many opportunities for the students to personalize their learning. So there's all sorts of activities that they can do, and they introduce different characters in textbooks, but these should be used as models. So the students should be able to look at something like the blue box here. I'm Michael. He's like listening to classical music and so on and so forth. They should be able to use this as a model to create paragraphs to talk about themselves. So personalizing the information is important. And that can help them go through that brain fact of trying to understand who they are and how they might change. Brain fact number 3, the teenage brain develops new thinking skills and computational abilities of adults, but emotions interfere. And we'll talk about emotions a couple of times here today because it's a complicated topic. So what do we mean with emotions interfering? Well, the teacher's response in all of this has to be to develop a skeptical approach. So students are often, they believe things because they read it somewhere, or somebody they trust told them, or they just heard it on the internet. So always students are coming into the class saying, "Oh yeah, I heard this," right? And you think, well, have you thought critically about it in some way? So we need to teach students these critical thinking skills, and we need to teach them early and often. So we have to develop a skeptical approach. So when you hear something new, you have to ask who, what, when, where, why, how. You need to develop questions around, everything that you encounter. Is the source of the information trustworthy? Is it going to be true based on where it's coming from? If it's a problem, we have to go through the steps in the second step here of breaking down problems, and how instead of just seeing something as a big problem, thinking, okay, well, what are the different parts of a problem and how can I sort this out? They have to be able to search for evidence, look for things, and often this can be as simple as saying, okay, when you look up something on the World Wide Web and you find out some information, try to find 2 or 3 more sources that either support what you say or maybe give another point of view. Maintaining a vigilant attitude towards personal biases. We all believe certain things. We all believe certain things to be true, and it has to do with your personal biases. I'm Canadian. Of course, I think Canada is the best country. If you're from Argentina, of course you think Argentina is the best country. Everywhere around the world, people feel that. They have their certain biases. And we need to be conscious of those biases about what we think because they can be a barrier to learning new things. All right. So one thing is developing a skeptical approach to problem solving and decision making involves exposing students to problems. Too often we just give students answers in the classroom. We need to give them problems. And that can start even before you open a textbook. If I'm talking about something to do with twins, I would start the class by saying, okay, does anybody have a twin brother or a twin sister, or is there twins in your family, right? Oh, yes, my father has a twin sister. Okay, so, and then you find out information from them. You create a problem, say, is it a problem for someone to be a twin, or are there advantages? Yeah, just ask this. Get a conversation going. That way, when they enter into the classroom, when they enter into the textbook, they're interested already. They've got lots of good ideas to work with. They're not just working with open up the book to page 99 and have a look at this. break down problems into their simplest outcomes. So here's just an example, and you don't think of this as a problem because it looks like an explanation, but it's talking about dancing, and then it talks about different kinds of dancing. So there's many different kinds. So the problem here, or the question that they ask, is what's the reason for dancing and why are there so many different kinds? It actually doesn't give you a clear answer. It's something that the students need to think about, but they can break it down by looking at, for example, here, different kinds of dancing and thinking, what do they have in common? How are they different in some way? And that helps them to learn. Search for evidence that both supports and refutes a conclusion. So here's an example of something about couch potatoes. And do we watch a lot of TV? And then it gives some evidence for and some evidence against. Again, if we only give students answers, then they really only have questions. But if we give students questions, that's when they use their thinking. That's when they have to start thinking and looking at ideas and interpreting the information in front of them. So in this one, I love this one about couch potatoes. And of course, you can see in the picture, the funny thing about it is actually the teenagers are the active ones, and it's the parents who are the couch potatoes. So we often think about young people as being couch potatoes, but that's not what the survey results show. Okay. Maintaining a vigilant attitude toward their personal biases. Now, if I asked most of you at the beginning of this, who is more of a couch potato, adults or teenagers? You probably would have said teenagers, because we're used to seeing teenagers sitting around on the couch. After all, adults have to go to work. But actually, it turns out that adults do more. So our bias is interfering with our ability to learn and to really think objectively about something new. So the teacher's response again: develop a skeptical approach, break down problems, search for evidence for and against something, and maintain a vigilant attitudes towards your personal bias. Think about, what do I think, and why do I think that? Is it just because somebody told me to think like that, or is it something else? What about the emotions? We mentioned emotions at the beginning of this. That can interfere. It can interfere. Often, for example, with personal biases, we feel very, very strongly about things emotionally, and we don't want to hear other news. We don't want to hear something against it. So you hear things like, for example, the anti-vaxxation movement, or Wi-Fi is dangerous, it's going to fry my brain, or other things like that. And people become very emotional about these issues, and they're not really thinking. And teenagers are, by nature, quite emotional. So the question is, we just have to address that, and again, push back and say, is this just something you feel emotionally, or is this something you have evidence for that you're really thinking about? So I share this lovely little saying. It says, "It's impossible," said pride. "It's risky," said experience. "It's pointless," said reason. "Give it a try," whispered the heart. So sometimes our pride, our experience, and our reason interferes with learning, and we can't let it. Brain fact number 4. The teenage brain embraces risk, needing more stimulation than an adult brain. In fact, in studies done on roller coasters, they take the heartbeats of adults and teenagers. And adults, you go on a roller coaster, oh, they're so worried, and their heart's beating so much. And teenagers, they think, yeah, boring. They actually crave more excitement. And that's one reason why students are always, you see them always 24 hours a day looking at their phone. They're always looking for something else to stimulate their brain in some way. As teachers, what can we do about this? Well, we don't want them to engage in dangerous behaviors and things like that. We want to maintain a safe environment, but we do want them to be excited in some way. We do want them to be more involved. So we can start off with this question, and you can answer again if you're in a group or even by yourself. What are you afraid of? What are you most afraid of? So, of course, this is an area of research that's been done quite a bit. And the response is actually quite surprising. People's number one fear, it turns out, is public speaking. What? Really? This was a study done at the University of Washington with a huge number of respondents, and they asked people all the things that they were afraid of, and ghosts was at the bottom, clowns pretty close, darkness and things like zombies and everything else. Drowning is close up at the top. So public speaking and drowning, they're more afraid of public speaking than drowning. So in fact, we have a clue here and something useful in our classrooms. We realize all of a sudden that this is something that students are afraid of, and actually this is something that makes their hearts beat a little bit. So again, opportunities to get students individually and in pairs and in groups up speaking in front of others is actually something that they're afraid of, and it challenges them. It gets into those emotions and that excitement that they need in the classroom. So they actually, even though they say, no, 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 I don't like to, I don't want to, actually, once they do it, it is that excitement that they crave, that they want. So give multiple opportunities to speak in a variety of formats. So again, pair work, group work, debates, panel discussions, town hall meetings, presentations. So not just always one student stand up in the middle of the class, say something, but in a variety of ways. So it's not just so that they can see how comfortable they feel with speaking, but so that they can see the models that other students present. Do the other students have good eye contact? Do they have a clear voice? Do they smile while they talk? You know, what are the skills that they're using? And that's the learning that goes on from peers. Adapt activities to make them more stimulating. So think, okay, well, look at any activity that you're doing and think, well, how can you add something to do something to make it a little more interesting? So for example, exploring students' lives and say, okay, maybe you can do something like this. Have students interview other students or maybe interview people in the public. I used to teach Japanese students, summer students at the University of Victoria, and I would always give them a list of questions to go ask a native speaker of English. It was a good chance for them to meet somebody new, and sometimes they made friends with other people. It was fantastic, so it was a good opportunity for them to do that. Brain fact number 5. Teachers' anxiety increases as they develop their ability to think abstractly and reflect on their roles. So young children have very clear ideas. They see actions and they have a clear interpretation of what that means. And so, you know, they see, you know, oh, your little boy comes home, he says, oh, I think Sally doesn't like me. And you say, oh, really? Why? Oh, she hit me. Okay, well, that's clear. That could be a good indication, right? And but when they get older, you say, oh, the teenager comes home, oh, I think Sally doesn't like me anymore. Really? Why not? She's your good friend. She says, oh, she looked at me funny, right? So again, it's starting to apply roles and think about how other people think. It's really what they do. So students need to challenge their inhibitions and build confidence in themselves by undertaking a range of social activities. So creating social activities in the classroom. We're saying this over and over again. Pair work, group work, individual work, debates, panel presentations, all of these things are chances for them to act out and respond to other people in different ways. One thing that, of course, again, mix pairs continuously is a key point. If you have the same pair of students working all the time, it's too easy for them. So shake it up with different pairs. Have them in groups, but find ways to make sure that they're all working. Sometimes in a group, people will say, okay, you do the work, I'm just going to close my eyes for a minute. And it's not fair. One way to do this is to number the groups, number everybody in the group, and then you choose which person will speak. Brain fact number 6. Teenagers have difficulty in interpreting emotions and directions. So they often don't understand other people's emotions. It can be confusing to them. We need to get students to think of and describe processes. What are outcomes of things? And we can relate new ideas to ones the students already knows. What are the best and worst things about your town? Things like that. This starts to bring in emotions because it starts to bring in things that they love and hate. That's part of it. They can explore emotions through activities, and again, this is a great one from Wider World, one of the textbook we're using examples from. So you borrowed student B's laptop, but dropped it, stopped working, apologize. What would you say? Student B, you don't accept student A's apologies. These are real world activities. This is something that's useful language, and it's tense situations, so it's all good. Number 7, teenagers' weakest reasoning skill is cause and effect. Really? Really? I didn't believe this. One of the a professor at the university, Simon Fraser University, using some of my own textbooks, and he said, "Yeah, you need more cause and effect in your books." And I said, "Really?" And I had to look it up, but it's true. It's true. They don't understand cause and effect. And when I think about it, I always remember. I always remember when I was young, my mother probably had the same phrase your mothers had, which was, I would do something stupid. And she would say, "Why did you do that? Why did you do that?" And I would say, "Well, Michael did it." My best friend, right? "Michael did it." And she would say, "If Michael jumped off a cliff, would you jump off a cliff too?" And of course, as a teenager, I think, well, probably I would, right? I would think that would be fun or something like that. But the relationships pressure students into doing things. This is why, unfortunately, students are so susceptible to things like drinking and bullying and even drugs and things like that, is because if their peers do it, then they think they should be pressured into doing it as well. Teaching cause and effect is we can use images, but do a lot more with what's in the book. So this is just a simple picture. But you could say, what happened? What caused this? What was the effect? Say, oh, well, probably the woman hit the man on the bicycle, so he fell off, right? What happens next, though, right? What if he's passes out? Does she call an ambulance? Does he go to the hospital? Does he go to the courthouse and sewer? What are all the causes and effects from one small thing? So looking forward like that. This is a cute one, and I'm just going to look at the cartoons here. It's all about this girl that's overbooked. Are you enjoying dance classes? Yes, I am. Is she sleeping? So she has so many different things that the mother makes her do that she's quite miserable. But Holly also enjoys art at the weekend, right? Yes, Mama, I am painting. Okay, so this is a bit silly, this one, but it really shows that it shows this idea that again, students have emotional responses to things, and they want to do their own thing, and they want to personalize their lives in some ways. Okay, so how can teachers explore this cause and effect? In this case, the cause was, the mother, giving too many activities to the child, but the effect was the child acting out in doing vandalism, painting walls that she shouldn't, right? So, brain fact number 8: teenagers experiment with emotions, trying them out on teachers, parents, and others. And again, if you have teenagers yourself, you know this. I recently watched the film Arrival, and in the film, there's something about the young daughter, and there's a scene, 2 scenes just together. It's a little girl, it's her daughter. She's remembering her daughter. The first one is, "Oh, Mommy, I love you so much," right? And the next one is, "I hate you." And if you've had teenagers, you see they go through this sometimes. Unfortunately, I'm quite lucky. My teenagers seem to be fairly well behaved, but my goodness, they go through these emotions, and they're in fact experimenting with them. They're trying them out in different ways, right? So what's the teacher's response? One of the biggest challenges that we have is, when should we address inappropriate emotions, and when should we just let them go? How do we address emotions in the classroom? Well, here's a little chart that actually shows some of the problems. Sometimes a task is too difficult. If it's too difficult, it leads to frustration, right? But sometimes it's too easy. The skills required are too easy, and that results in the green box, boredom. And so what we need is something right in between, something that's creative, it helps to build the skills, and if we find those areas, that's where the students flow. How do we do that? Well, sometimes we have to adapt what's in the book. We have to take things that are in the book and make them a little bit better, because otherwise we end up with these types of behaviors. Sometimes it's defiant. students cross their arms. They won't do anything. They don't want to participate, right? Sometimes they're a little bit withdrawn. They think, oh, okay, whatever. Sometimes compliant, like, okay, I'll do it. Sometimes, and I think this is the worst one, they're tactical. Say, excuse me, will this be on the test, teacher? Right? Do we have to learn this? Terrible things for students to say, but they're becoming tactical in ways to find out, what exactly they need to learn just to pass a course. And of course, language is not just something you pass. It's a skill you learn and you develop throughout the rest of your lives. So we want this flow section in the middle, which is intrinsic. Intrinsic is really where you find that you're learning because you want to. One thing for us to do a lot with this is role play. So in pairs, role play the situation. Student A look below, student B look at another page. Again, you do something. You shout it. It's bringing in emotions here in different ways, but they have to solve a real problem by role-playing it. And this gives students opportunities to try out these emotions in class in a safe way that they're not going to just yell at a teacher or get angry or do something wrong. Brain fact number 9. Teenagers are slow to develop empathy for others. So I'm afraid, I remember my oldest son. He's in economics at university now. He's 18. Be 19 soon, and he when he was younger, he didn't have any empathy. He would say, well, he said poor people. He said homeless people. Why don't they get a job? And I said, well, sometimes they've got a large family. They've got to take care of their children. He said, homeless people. They shouldn't have children. It's just crazy, right? He's thinking, really only in economic terms, something, and he doesn't have empathy. He doesn't feel for those people. He doesn't put himself in their places. I'm glad to say he's growing out of that teenage years, and he thinks much more. He thinks much more about the welfare of others. But in foreign language teaching, this is something from Moskowitz, 1978, but still true. Too often we start with the textbook, and we're using the textbook as a model, and then we finally, at the end, we talk about the students. But what Moskowitz says, transfer to the textbook is easier when the content starts with the student. So again, this goes back to always asking, what do you think? What do you know? What do you know about this topic? Are you interested in this topic all the time? And not just opening the book to the page we're doing. So here's an example again from the book, just one small example. Giving news, I'm learning how to, I'm spending a lot of time with, I'm not enjoying. These are all points that that the students can complete on their own, and every student will answer it in a slightly different way that is personal. We're bringing it back to being personal again. Brain fact number 10, our last ones. This is one, unfortunately, you think you cannot do so much about. Teenagers need more sleep. Wow, yeah, I think, again, if you have teenagers, they sleep forever if they have the chance. And also, they don't go to bed until very, very late. There was a school in New Jersey that understood these findings and decided they wanted to do something about it. So they made a very, very simple change, to the classroom curriculum. All they did in the classroom curriculum is they changed it so that the students only didn't come in as usual at 8 o'clock in the morning. They came in 2 hours later at 10 o'clock in the morning. What's curious about this is all of the other changes that happened because of it. Many other things happened because of it. First of all, the students' grades went up. The students' performance on sports teams went up. So they started winning all their sports team in basketball and football and different sports because they were more awake. They had had a better sleep. They were coming to class that way. Discipline problems within the school went down. They were actually much calmer, much happier because they got enough sleep. And also, the most surprising one is there were fewer accidents outside of school, because often early in the morning when they were coming for class at 8 o'clock or 8:30, they would have a bicycle accident, or they would walk in front of a car, or they would trip and fall, or they would have an accident in the playground. All of a sudden, it all changed. It all began to stop. And it was simply by changing the hours. Now I know what you're thinking. Okay, sorry, that sounds great, but we can't do that in our school. Maybe we can't, but we can do two things. First of all, I would ask, if you're giving a test to students, don't give it first thing in the morning. You won't get the students' best behavior, best performance on a class, no matter how much they know the material. If you give a class at 8:30, a test at 8:30, students will not do as well as they will at 11:30 in the morning. So if you have a choice between giving a test early in the morning and later, and I know some people don't, that you need to deal with that. But the other part of this is motivation. If they're tired, they need a higher degree of motivation. And again, it goes back to the same things we've been saying. You have to find ways to make it about the students, make students more interested in the content. So the teacher's response is that teenagers' rhythms are different, and teachers should consider the times when they're most awake and also be concerned about stimulants that they may use to stay awake. I remember going to one school, and when I was teaching a secondary school, I started off, my specialty was emotionally disturbed children. I ended up actually working in a prison facility for teenagers, terrible kids who had done, everything from armed robbery to assault, prostitution, and murder. Terrible, terrible children. But they had to be educated. But in another school I was teaching at, also with kids not so bad, but I remember walking to school one day myself, and in front of me was one student, and he had a big jug of soda pop and a bag of chips. And I think his mother had given him some money for breakfast and said, yes, buy your breakfast or something. But of course, drinking, so much cola or something like that, of course he was not going to be, he was using stimulants that would make him, that wouldn't be very good in the classroom. Too excited, and then he would crash. Okay, so what do we know? We've covered a lot of different ideas here. I just want to very briefly go over these just as a reminder, and you can put them together with some of the ideas that we've said. First of all, culture is very, very important in a variety of ways, but most importantly, students need the language to talk about their own culture. First language may interfere with how they learn a second language, but there's a lot of literature that's been written about this. And you can predict where they will have the problems, and that's where you as a teacher need to tailor your lessons and give a little more information. The students' maturity levels will differ. If we treat them with respect, hopefully they treat the teachers with respect as well. But we have to realize that it's a changing thing, that they will become more mature in time. Their aptitude can be natural if they've learned, 2 or 3 languages already, and that's fantastic for us. But if they don't have very strong aptitude, it just means we need to work a little bit harder and make the materials more motivating in some way so that they will continue to learn as efficiently and effectively as possible. Intelligence is really not an important thing in the classroom, and even if a student is not a very strong student in other classes, it doesn't mean that they can't learn a language. We should realize that and maybe give some students extra time to do a test, because really we just want them to have a positive attitude towards learning a language, because again, that has to do with autonomy. They will need the skills to learn throughout the rest of their lives. With learning styles, one of our points is that, yes, they may prefer to learn in some ways, but it doesn't mean that's the only way that they should learn. In fact, we're better off mixing up different ways of learning throughout. And then finally, autonomy. Autonomy is giving the students those skills so that they can continue to learn language throughout the classroom. We don't have enough time to teach them every word in the dictionary, every point in a grammar book, everything they're going to need to say throughout life. So we have to give them the autonomy so they have simple questions that they can continue to learn on their own. All right. So just in summary, I would say that teenagers stand between childhood and adulthood, and they can best make the transition with the support of teachers who try to understand them, address their needs. it's really very important for us to somehow push them to help understand, what their needs are and help them in different ways in the classroom using quality materials, but also just really understanding who they are individually as young teenagers who are going through great changes in their lives. I've got a website, kenbeatty.ca, with lots of teaching ideas on it for you, so you can copy that down, and I hope that was useful. All right, now what we'd like to do is, I think we may have a few questions. I think Patricia will be asking me, and also I wanted, before I go, to remind you that this is the first of a week of webinars by a variety of people. I'm talking on Wednesday morning at the same time again on another topic, if you're interested, but there are other excellent presentations this week as well. So now I think we have to turn it over to Patricia and see if we have any questions. Patricia, can you unmute?
Yes, here I am. Yes, we do have many questions.
Okay.
People have apparently people have been engaged in the topic, sending in a lot of questions. We have here, for example, a question from Diana and Lucia, who have sent similar questions. They are interested in knowing how can we improve the students' concentration skills.
Concentration. Okay, so this is an excellent question. Thank you so much, Diana, Lucia. Concentration is an important thing in the classroom because, students, especially teenagers, they daydream. They're always, their brain starts going somewhere else. One of the most important things we can do is to engage them in a variety of activities. So, of course, if a teacher is just talking, and I'm sorry, maybe for some of you today at some point, your mind starts to go somewhere else. But if we have different activities and we're constantly changing the activities in the classroom, say, okay, now working on your own, now working in a pair, let's have a group, let's have a little debate now, and let's ask different students their ideas. That can sort of help them to keep their concentration because they don't know what's coming next. And so they have to pay more attention in the classroom. And the variety actually just makes it a little more interesting. The second answer, of course, is motivation. They have to be motivated to pay attention. You know yourself. Anything that you're really interested in, you concentrate it on such a degree. You're reading your book and you're just at the most exciting part. Nobody can interrupt you. It's like fantastic. But that's because you're motivated to learn it. So again, finding the student's motivation or manufacturing that motivation for them. Patricia, another question?
Yes, I have here another question from James Rodriguez, and he says some of his students are not motivated to learn English, so what should he do?
Okay, all right. So this is so common worldwide, not being motivated to learn English. And it's because quite often they don't see, well, when am I going to use this language? So I'll tell you a little story. I have students in Bogota, Colombia at Universidad de La Sabana, and one of the teachers that I work with, they're all teachers, and she told me this great story. She had a golf caddy, the kids who carry the golf clubs for the golfers. So anyway, she was an English teacher at this club and teaching, the receptionists and the pros and the restaurant staff English and the caddies, the ones who carried the golf clubs. And there was one boy who was absolutely not interested. Bored. He just sat at the back of the class and played with his phone, would never answer a question. If you asked him anything, he'd say, I don't know, no lo conozco. And so it was very frustrating for her. But then one day, she comes into class. He's all dressed nicely. He's sitting at the front of the class. He has his 3 pencils on his desk. He's got his book open. His phone is not to be seen. She's so surprised. Anyway, and he's, so she starts teaching. Oh, his hand is up for every question. She tried to answer every question. And she can't understand this. This is a big mystery. So this goes on all week. And finally on Friday, she said, oh, can I talk to you after class? Oh, yes, miss, certainly, miss, right? And so after class, she said, what happened? What was the difference? And he said, I hate to say this, but he said, I only speak Spanish, so I work with the Colombians, mostly the business people from Bogota who come to the golf course to play. But the other caddies who speak English, They work with the Australians and the British and the American tourists who come, the Canadians who come. And he said, the Canadians and the Americans, the British, New Zealanders, they tip 10 times as much. They pay 10 times as much for the caddies as others. So what happened here? What happened? It's silly, but he realized, he became motivated because he found the reason himself. So I would do a couple of things. First of all, you have to just say to the students, where do you think you might learn English? Where do you think you might use English sometime in your life? Not now, maybe not this year, but next year, the year after, because it takes years to learn a language. And make them start to realize. You can share this story. But think about and explain all of the opportunities that they can have if they learn English, all the different kinds of jobs. And a very simple one is this. It's a study done, I think it was by Stanford University. They looked at economically how much more money you made if you spoke a second language. And for people who speak English, it's not so much. It's about 5% more. You can get paid about 5% more throughout your life, which adds up. But they said for someone whose first language is not English, when they learn English, they get paid 10 to 15% more throughout their lives. It's a huge amount. It's a huge amount. So it is a language of opportunity, and economic opportunity right now. It will change maybe someday. Maybe it'll become Chinese or Russian or something else. But right now, it's a language of opportunity. So you have to find ways for them to think, yeah, what would I use English for and why? It's a good point. All right. Patricia, another question. Do we have time?
Yes, we have another one that Olga and Roosevelt shared, and it is related to misbehavior. They say the students are all the time calling their attention or looking at their cell phones, not turning off their cell phones, for example. So what can they do?
Yes, it's so common. It's so common. I'll just concentrate more on the cell phones as a misbehavior because that's so common. I know that I've heard several things. One is that many teachers just collect the cell phones at the beginning of the class. And some teachers have, in their classrooms, they've hung up, you've seen these shoe racks where they have many places for the shoes to go. They just number them and say, yes, at the start of class, put your phone into that. That's one sort of thing, just taking it away from the students and to do something. But another approach which is seems a little crazy, but it's to actually start changing your teaching a little bit to get students to use their phones more for the class. So, for example, many of the materials for Wider World, other courses, they have online materials that go with it. Maybe you could say, okay, take out your phones. We're going to do this part of the course. Then all of a sudden they start using their phones for the classroom materials. Or you think of an assignment. Okay, I want you to all look up on your phone something. I think then once the students, I've talked to teachers who have tried these approaches. These are not my ideas. But they say that once the students start using their phones for learning English, then they start thinking of other ways they can use it to learn language. And it kind of changes, kind of changes that. Yeah, it kind of changes some of that thing. So there's also many tools for sending messages to phone and things like that. And even one teacher, I remember one day, she said, okay, we're going to have a class, but only in chat, text chat. So she put up, or she did a Twitter. So she put up a Twitter hashtag, and she said, no talking in this class. And she just taught the whole class on Twitter, and all the students had to Twitter all their answers and questions and everything else. So maybe there's some creative ways that you can think about doing it, but I know, my own children, all I can do is to say, at the dinner table, no phones. That's our big rule. Never when you're eating. So we do talk, but yeah. So take them away or find a way to use them more interestingly. Yeah. Okay, Patricia, have we run out of time for questions? I'm sure some people have to go. They've got things.
I have one more, if you think it's okay, and then we finish. Yeah, Mikhail and Julie Jama are interested in knowing how to develop speaking skills. So if you could give them some tips.
Right, okay, fantastic. So speaking skills, one of the most challenging in the classroom. Why? Because students don't get that many opportunities to speak. And so the first thing to do in the classroom is to think, how much am I speaking as a teacher and how much are the students speaking? So they really need a couple of different things. And again, a lot of the textbooks do this because they stagger it. Generally, you should start with teacher talking, and then the whole class maybe repeating some things, but then working in groups, and then working in pairs, and then always giving them a chance to present. Think about yourself, how often you practice ideas in your head when you're going to present something. You know, if I'm going somewhere, if I was on the road and a policeman was behind me and pulled me over, of course in my head I'm going through a script. I'm developing a script because I think I will have to use it. But if in the classroom we never ask students to speak, then they don't develop those scripts all the time. But if we're constantly in the habit of asking students, you know, tell us what you think, and not just answering simple closed-ended questions, but open-ended questions. Say, tell us what you think, or you know, what are your ideas about this? And also, one teacher I know, Elizabeth Gatfontan, she said always sentences. She would insist every time a student spoke, they were in sentences. And I said to her, I said, Elizabeth, in the real world, we don't speak in sentences all the time. She said, yes, but in the classroom, we should try to get them to do this so they at least get the practice there. But here is one very big tip. This is my secret tip that I use. I used when I was teaching language learners. Now I teach teachers. So this is a very, very simple thing that everyone can do at any age. All you have to do is every Monday morning is ask 3 or 4 or 5 students, what did you do this weekend? It's a very simple question. What did you do on the weekend, right? And you know, what happens on the first day? On the first day, the students say, nothing, and then you have to say, come on, you did something. Okay, what did you do Friday night? What did you do Saturday? You know, things like that. You have to push them a little bit more. If you do this every single Monday morning, every week, the students start thinking over the weekend what they're doing. Because all of a sudden they're thinking, you know, they'll wake up on Sunday night, I guarantee, and they'll go, oh my goodness, she's going to ask me tomorrow morning what I did this weekend. How do I say that in English? And so they start to think in English. So this seems like a roundabout way, but it's really, speaking is not the problem. Thinking is the problem. They have to start thinking in English, and then it becomes easier to speak. But they will only think in English if we push them and give them opportunities to speak in the classroom.
Okay, thank you, Ken. Thank you all for participating. We've run out of time. We will be waiting for you next Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Remember, this is the teenage week, so we will have a lot of interesting topics for you. So we wait for you all to join us in. Thank you, Ken.
Okay, thanks so much. Bye-bye, everyone.